So what are my recommendations? So if you're going for the sort of minimalist approach, and I just want to get protein, I want to just hit protein target and carry on. I do think the more recent research saying around 1.3 to 1.4 grams of protein is going to be okay for the majority of people. Welcome to episode 3 of the Smart Strength Training podcast. Now, this is a podcast about strength training, so it only feels right that we talk about protein. Protein is, of course, it's a hot topic, and it is something of a marketing gem right now. The conversation around protein is very broad. So for this episode, we're going to focus on protein recommendations and the difference between some of the recommendations that are out there. First up, just in case you want to know what protein actually does in the human body, let's go through some of the benefits of eating protein. So I think people in the fitness space are well aware that protein is involved in tissue repair and tissue growth, but it's also got a key role in enzyme and hormone production. It's involved in supporting immune function as well as transportation and storage of oxygen. And protein really is part of the structural component of all cells in the human body. I think collagen probably is the most well-known protein that's out there. Let's talk about guidelines then. So we've got a few different guidelines. The UK government guidelines currently sit at 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per kilo of body weight per day, whereas the fitness guidelines sit at 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. So more than double, or potentially more than double. Let's discuss this fitness guidelines first. So 1.6 to 2.2, there are various research papers and meta-analyses on this. It probably originates from Tanner Stokes' work in 2018. These guidelines have been around for a little while now. Let's discuss the range. So 1.6, why would you go to 1.6 versus 2.2? So 1.6, the idea at 1.6 is that if you're trying to build muscle, you should be eating plenty of calories in your diet. Your focus is to try and build tissues. So you're eating at least a maintenance, if not surplus, in total energy. So your body's got an abundance of energy to build tissues. You just don't need as much protein. But when you're trying to lose body fat in a diet or a cutting phase, you could be losing muscle tissue. Appreciating that if you're eating at a calorie deficit, we are looking to the body to turn towards stored energy to fuel activity. And we want to turn to stored fat, not to muscle mass. So if we elevate protein higher during a diet phase, we can preserve lean muscle. It's also a really important caveat that you have to have a stimulus placed upon the body to actually drive nutrients into the muscle, which is probably a conversation for another episode. But yeah, just recognizing building muscle, come down to 1.6, diet phase, go up as high as 2.2. If we glance at the research in this space, nothing particularly magical happens at this 1.6 line. If you look at 1.3 or 4 grams of protein to 1.6, it's really marginal to what happens there. And when you go above 2.2, again, 2.2 does seem to be the cutoff. Anything over 2.2, there's research that goes up as high as, say, 3.4. And we'll discuss what this all means in a moment. But when you go higher than 2.2, something called muscle protein synthesis doesn't seem to be elevated further. And we'll discuss what that means in just a moment. And I think more importantly, as I said, this initial research is from 2018. In the last 18 months, I've seen plenty of really good research papers come out suggesting that we can build muscle down around the 1.3 zone. And like I said, nothing particularly magical seems to happen at this 1.6. It is just the guidelines that the research papers at the time set. And it's also important to point out that some demographics of people, some people actually will have different protein needs. If you are an experienced lifetime lifter, you're actually better at utilizing protein. So more experienced lifters don't need as much protein as, say, a more newbie. Older adults are less sensitive to protein. So there is a strong conversation around older adults eating more protein. I really want to come in here into about women going through menopause, super popular topic. There is some research, and I've seen plenty of people jump on that research and start making quite robust statements around it. We just don't have the large enough quality data to accurately make suggestions. So as much as I'd love to sit here and just say what that research says, it certainly leans towards maybe eating a slightly higher protein diet. But like I said, we just don't have the quality research that we need on that. Okay, now let's go down to the 0.8 to 1 gram. I think it's worth just thinking, why is there a big difference? 0 0.8 to 1 versus 1.6 to 2. That's quite a large difference between protein recommendations. You often see people like Team Spectre, people in the continuous blood glucose monitor sort of space saying we don't need to eat as high as 1.6, we're all good on like 0.8. Why is there this huge gap between the two numbers? And it's based on the fact there's actually two different branches of research into protein recommendations. The 0.8 to 1 is based on the nitrogen balance research. And now nitrogen balance is a measure of nitrogen input versus nitrogen output to try and calculate protein metabolism. And by that, I mean that if I measure how much protein someone consumes and then how much protein someone excretes, I can calculate how much protein is absorbed, and therefore that's a way of measuring how much protein is used. The problem with nitrogen balance research is we excrete nitrogen through urine, feces, breath, and sweat. So it becomes quite tricky to gather all that information, and as you can imagine, quite messy research to do and very expensive research to do. So we don't have as much robust research in the nitrogen balance space because it is just harder to get and potentially is quite challenging to be accurate. Protein synthesis research. So protein synthesis is the process by which cells build muscle. And this is done via two stages, transcription and translation. And it can be measured during or by stable isotope amino acid tracing, or by ribosome profiling, and there are other ways of doing it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I completely understand how protein synthesis is measured, but what I do know is that it is very hard to get 100% accurate data on it. So we have challenges in the research space, and it's not to say that they're wrong, it's just to say this is an emerging area, or certainly it's a popular area, lots of eyes on protein research. And I fully expect these numbers, these guidelines to move around. So I watched literally maybe, I don't know, a month or so ago on the same day, a podcast with someone saying you shouldn't eat more than 1.8, 0.8, and then a protein research talking about how we should go as high as 2.2. And I mean, who the hell are you going to believe? I've got two doctors talking about it. So my own personal belief, I'm going to lean more in favor of the protein synthesis research. It's far more robust as far as a research space, and I think we can put more stock in it. So what are my recommendations? So if you're going for the sort of minimalist approach, and I just want to get protein, I want to just hit protein target and carry on, I do think the more recent research saying around 1.3 to 1.4 grams of protein is going to be okay for the majority of people. Let's discuss protein synthesis. So protein synthesis is something that you want to have elevated throughout the day to put your body into a positive state of tissue repair so you can build muscle. Now, this is worthwhile pointing out at this stage that there's a lot of conflicting information about how much protein we can absorb. You might have heard people say you can't absorb more than 20 to 30 grams of protein. Absorb is incorrect. We definitely can absorb all the protein that we consume, but muscle protein synthesis is elevated and maximized at around 20 to 30 grams of protein per serving. And this idea of if I eat loads of protein, I'm not going to turn on muscle protein synthesis higher and higher with more and more protein. But this 20 grams of protein is based on rested state. And there are a few situations where actually our protein synthesis can be elevated higher. The first is on waking after fasting. So we're more protein sensitive first thing in the morning. So we can consume larger amounts of protein first thing in the morning, and directly after training, because during training, we create something called muscle protein breakdown. So directly after training, we're able to switch on muscle protein synthesis higher. So this idea that we actually can have morning and after training higher amounts of protein. But the idea really is I'm going to shoot for my daily protein target, and I'm going to go for 3 or 4 larger boluses. By boluses, I mean like a large portion rather than sort of like small snacks or nuts, that kind of thing. 3 or 4 portions throughout the day. There also does seem to be some research to suggest that a nighttime feeding of protein is also beneficial. So it just makes logical sense that I can get 20 or 30 grams in at breakfast, directly after training, and in the evening, and split my protein across maybe 3 or 4 meals across the day. Now let's come to this idea of 2.2. Why I don't think 2.2 is practically that smart. If you are in a diet phase and you're eating a caloric deficit and you're having to put aside 2.2 grams of protein and therefore quite a lot of calories into the protein bucket or into the protein portion of your foods, it gives you much less wiggle room for carbohydrates and fats. And in my experience and talking to clients and people online, they struggle to hit those sort of numbers and enjoy the diet. And we know the most important element of any diet is sustainability. So by going as high as 2.2, it can really make people struggle to hit those sorts of numbers and therefore struggle to adhere to the diet. So I just don't see the reason to go as high as that. That being said, if you are on a diet phase and you're eating at 2.2 grams of protein per day and it's no problem for you at all, I don't think there's any reason to come down. I just don't think we need to go as high. And of course, there's a lot of conversation around protein in kidneys. We'll save that for another episode. But just to say that if you're struggling to hit a lower 1.6, I would say you're going to be absolutely fine at 1.3. If you're up at 2.2 and you're struggling to stay there and it's not enjoyable for your diet phase, come down, because I don't really see a major benefit of staying that high. So they really are the main takeaways from this. I would say that keep an eye on the research space. I fully anticipate having to do another protein episode on this topic in the not too distant future as these guidelines change. Like I say, it's big marketing. And my final sort of note on this is I do believe that with big marketing, there's this huge push for almost like highly processed foods that are high in protein. I think it's really sensible to orientate your protein around whole food sources. I do think like whey protein shakes are a highly bioavailable, high quality protein source and can be used sensibly when trying to hit a protein target. My concern comes is when people are using protein cereals and all these sorts of things to try and push protein up because they're shooting for these 2.2s. And I just don't think there's enough benefit as going as high as that. So hopefully there was some use to this episode and some little nuggets of information that you can go away and implement in your nutrition straight away.